Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if you have your natal Black Moon Lilith in the 10th house of career and public reputation. Guess who has it? I do. And I really didn't know exactly how it would manifest. And so I consulted a couple of sites, elsa.com and advancedastrology.com. And it made me more aware of some of these things. And I have to say that I really resonate with it and I understand myself much better. I have this in Aquarius. And by the way, I'm also going to do Lilith in the signs because I think that it will add additional depth to looking at what's going on. Because, for instance, if you're like me and you have it in Aquarius in the 10th house, that's going to add to the rebellious factor. And people are going to find it hard to really get a handle on you. So Black Moon Lilith has different definitions depending on what site you go on. How I have understood it thus far is that if you want to talk about it in terms of a feminist type of influence, it's kind of like the rebellious feminist influence of not having to conform to societal norms. Now, this doesn't have to be in this particular era because I honestly think in at least the Western world that is a done deal, that there's no major issues with that. What I'm talking about is in the past, traditionally, what has subjugated women. But even if we take this in a more universal way, people fulfilling certain roles. And this is exacerbated by the 10th house, which can be this house of career. It's ruled by Saturn, which is going to deal with tradition and your public reputation. What is that going to be? That's going to be the judgment of other people based on social conditioning. So it's not necessarily anything that you have to accept. But unfortunately, a lot of people are vulnerable to the opinions of others. If you are a Libra individual, this can be especially distressing because you are someone who, it's not just like, I'm not looking at this as somebody who's weak and they just can't handle anybody not liking them. Yes, there might be some Libra people that it's just that simple for them. But really for Libra, they don't want to make waves. And, Black Moon Lilith in the 10th house is all about that. And you might not even be doing anything specific. You may just be taking up space and it's pissing people off for whatever reason. Having this placement myself, I can state that I have never felt a time in my life where I was just totally, I felt comfortable in how other people perceived me. But of course, it's always my perception of how others perceive me. I try not to spend too much time thinking about that, to be honest with you. There's a saying, what other people think about me is none of my business. And while that, it kind of is weird and doesn't make sense to me, sometimes I do use that to stay detached. But I have to confess, and I think that some of you with Lilith in the 10th will also admit to, is that there is a part of us that has an inner troll that loves to play with this public image. And if you are a Leo person, I was going to say God help you, but God help the rest of us, because you're attention seeking to begin with, or Leo rising or something like that. And these kinds of things can be, deliberately trying to be outrageous, and you may just take it over the top. I'm really referring to just your basic way of being and how other people react to it. I was getting a feeling from these sites that I visited that there's this, it's almost like Lilith in the first house and how it manifests, because the first house can be your persona or your image, and the 10th house is your reputation. So sometimes those two things are not that far apart. But and also they share the common traits of being angular houses. So they're considered very important in astrology. But anyway, getting back to the actual effects of this, a person here with this position can be quite, like provocative without even trying to be. Now, speaking of being provocative, there's always kind of that plutonic undercurrent, which can have a sexual energy attached to it in one way, shape, or form, whether it's actual, the way that the person looks, or the way that they act, like they're very seductive in some way. Now, one of the sites, I'm not sure because I did start this reading again. The two sites I consulted were advancedastrology.com and elsa.com. I recommend these two sites for information on Black Moon Lilith. And one of these sites did mention that the closer you are to the midheaven, which is MC on the chart, the 10th house cusp, the more that overt seductive trait will manifest. At least that's what I remember reading. But I beg to differ. I think that if it's in the 10th, it'll show up. And it could even be appearance too. Because remember, this is reputation, and this is a house of fame. So, or infamy, you could say that too. And so you're on center stage in the 10th house, so I don't think it really matters whether it is actually forming a conjunction with midheaven. This can be seducing the public, I feel, in some way. And if you are someone who is in the arts, I think that this can be a really great position to have. I was thinking of what came into my mind was rock band, something where, if you're a woman, you can be very masculine and you can kind of be very rebellious. If you are a man, it might be like David Bowie, where you're androgynous, or you're actually, you're kind of doing something that's shocking to society. You're rebelling against society. I need to do David Bowie's chart because I think that he has some interesting things going on there. So the bottom line is that this is the house of authority figures. So you may feel like you have had problems with them growing up into adulthood. They say that this is connected to the father, but certainly if your mother was more of the authority figure, and if you didn't even have a father in the home, then certainly I feel like the mother could be that authority figure that you clashed with, and that was trying to keep you in line. And I personally feel, just based on my own experiences thus far, that it's not always the case where you are going to be outwardly rebelling. And also other signs of rebelling that have to do with the 10th house could be like, or authority figures could be Mars in the 10th, for instance, or Pluto in the 10th, where you have power struggles. But I don't think it always plays out like that. I think sometimes you can attract that to you. So it's more underground. And I'm saying this because of my own experiences. But it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, does it? All that matters is what is actually happening. And so some things that can come about is that if you are somebody who is looking for power, it can make you feel anxious when you don't receive it. This is information I'm getting from advancedastrology.com. I don't agree with this based on my own experiences, but I'm going to put it out there because I'm sure some of you do. Because what they say is that people with this position do not want to be mediocre in life, that they're very ambitious, and that they want to be impactful on the world. And I think that that is true overall. But I don't think that everyone is just kind of like consumed with ambition or wanting to be famous or needing to be. But I would say, based on my own feelings about this, that a person with this position probably wants to have some kind of, you could say it's not power per se where you want to control other people, but influence of some kind. And not even that you want to get somebody to do something that you tell them to do. But I guess it is impact on the world, that you want to be seen. I think that might be the case. But, we have to choose our words wisely because it's a very slippery slope from wanting to be seen to attention whore, right? And needing a fame whore. So that's important to distinguish. Another thing, we could talk about bad reputation. So the girl who is the loose woman, and everybody knows about it in school, for instance, and they have the bad reputation. I remember being in school, and I went to high school in the early 80s, and there was such a girl that was, like, oh, she sleeps with everybody, blah, blah, blah. And this was in the early 80s, so it wasn't like a puritanical era. But, you could say, well, the concept of what being a good girl is versus the bad girl is that if you are on the younger side, if you are like in your early 20s and you remember back to high school, did they still have that kind of distinction of like the good girl, bad girl syndrome? I mean, I think things have changed so much that it might not be that way at all. There's an element of suppression with this influence that I feel that is what leads to rebellion, or conversely, to continuing a life of quiet desperation. If you do not live an authentic life, how is that going to move your energy? You're going to feel stagnation. You're going to feel like you are really not living in a sense. So those are the two extremes. The person who just is like, screw this world, I'm going to do whatever, whenever, and they're just, chaotic, or the person who's living this very restricted life, and they're not going after their dreams. They're just kind of like maybe playing it safe, but also being very, very repressed in their instincts. So looking at that in your life, like which extreme do you tend to fall in, or have you really express this in a healthy way is the question. Because there may be, maybe a person goes from one extreme to the other. First, they're very, repressed, and then they go hog wild. Maybe at some point they are in the middle and they kind of stabilize that. And let's see what else that I wanted to say. Also, they mentioned doing sex work. And that was something that I was wondering about, because I don't know if I brought that up. I just did Black Moon Lilith in the 6th house, and that could also apply to the 6th house, and I should have mentioned that. I didn't see it where I was reading it, but I think that it could be. And one reason why is some sites talk about Black Moon Lilith as taboos. Again, that has a Plutonian influence, okay, or Plutonic. I'm thinking Platonic. Where it's kind of the taboo professions. What is an acceptable profession? I have always been completely baffled why sex work is considered something like that's horrific. Yeah, if it's illegal, if it's illicit, it could be quite dangerous. It could be deadly. But in terms of choosing that, I mean, there are sex therapists that maybe sometimes do the same things, and that would probably be considered more respectable. But the oldest profession is considered like completely disgusting for a lot of people, even people who are well educated and supposedly progressive. They think it's such a regressive thing, to be a prostitute. And it's really weird. I mean, I think that if you're coming to sex work from sexual abuse, I think that is very problematic, because it can be that acting out of like, okay, well, if I'm going to be if I'm going to be used by people, I'm going to be abused by people, then I might as well get paid for it. That's really what's going on in the back of people's minds, or I'm going to make them pay. And it's a better version than, violence, to make somebody pay monetarily, but it's coming from the wrong place. And it's not a good vibration. But doing it because you feel that you were meant to heal people, like a tantric kind of a thing, I think is a completely legitimate way to have a career. I really do. If your mindset is very high, and it's good conditions, then I think that it's perfectly fine, and I don't see the problem with it. Unfortunately, there's a lot of brokenness in this area on both sides, with people who are Johns, people, they might be sex addicts, they might have been sexually abused, and they have a sex addiction that they're fulfilling. There's just so many variables that can feed into trauma. So it has to be definitely handled very carefully. But I just don't see the stigma attached to it. But with another thing that can happen here with quest for power, using one's sexuality to kind of climb the ladder of success. There's certainly, we know about the casting couch that existed, and we know that there were certain actresses and probably actors who declined. And if you're old enough to have been on this planet for decades, and you remember certain really hot actors, maybe of the 80s, and then you never heard from them again, it's very possible that they refused that casting couch. And guess what? They stopped being in the public eye, which is the 10th house. So the pay to play, kind of thing. And the seductress who is seducing people for what end? For power. And along with power goes money. When I do Lilith in the second, it will be like that Venus-Pluto conjunction, if you will. But the person who is trying to gain power through money and maybe seduction can come into that. So being very, very clear about how you choose to advance your career and not trying to take a shortcut and using sexuality as a power, using seductiveness as a power that you're wielding. But again, it's an abuse of power because it's not coming from an organic place. Seduction is a manipulation. And it doesn't mean that everybody who is using that Lilith energy has to be a manipulative person. But I'm just saying. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. Let's see, anything else? Well, they mention here that Black Moon Lilith in the 10th house, going back to the parents, if your father was unavailable to you, cold, maybe rejecting, that you kind of either have issues with them. I would say also, especially with women, seductive as a way to kind of attract that male attention. I don't know if that's what they're referring to. Well, what they were referring to was more like accomplishments. So I don't know if it would be in your personal life, but that sense of trying to achieve a lot to win your father's love. And that could actually be both genders. So yeah, if you struggle with issues that have to do with your worthiness, depending on how successful you are, then, this is for you to look at. I don't think that's necessarily true across the board. As a matter of fact, I experienced something that I explored with Lilith in the 6th house, of being rebellious about having a career altogether. Just like, who am I if I am not working whatsoever? And it was a real education, because I must have done this on purpose. This must have been a choice I made on a higher level. I don't think it was just being lazy or being, whatever. I don't think it had to do with that. I might have had a little bit of confusion about what I wanted to do, for sure. But I really think that it was a spiritual thing, because, and when I was in my early 20s and people would say, I remember this one man from my church, he came by and I was standing on the front stoop of my apartment, and he was talking. He says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Living." I said, "Breathing." And it was that defiance of like, who are you? What is your identity in the world, that 10th house? And I said, breathing. I was being totally rebellious. And, this wasn't a bad person. He meant well, but he was coming from a different place, and I was coming from a different place. And I was like in their face every time they tried to define me and try to, or maybe they even, I don't know if they were trying to shame me, but I felt like I was being provocative and I was provoking for them. What is our true self? Are we what we do? Are we our job title? Are we our career? And can you respect somebody who doesn't have a career? Will you treat them as less than? Will you see them as less than? Do they have a right to exist alongside of you, regardless? It's a very interesting. Some of you may have experienced the same thing, but I was seeing that they were mentioning this with Lilith in the 6th house, and saying that the person just decides to reject work altogether. And I had a very similar experience. But again, it wasn't that I had zero ambition. I just didn't have it in the way other people did. And, I grew up in an area where there were many accomplished people, very ambitious. Even when I was in high school, I just did not, I did not fit into that. Everyone was so serious about their future. And that's what the 10th house represents, is our future. And I was very like in the moment and not into that. And so if you are on the younger side and you're going through what I went through, do not fear, but don't overreact to it. Don't, like, because some of you might be Capricorns. Can you imagine being a Capricorn with Black Moon Lilith in the 10th house? And you really do feel like, oh my gosh, I'm 22 years old and I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I went through college, I still don't know. Or you're still in college and you're changing majors the way you change underwear or whatever. Or maybe you're 30 and you're a Capricorn and you still haven't found yourself. There is no, the self that wants to be found is not the lowercase self. There's the uppercase self that is not dependent on your career. So don't worry about it. Just be here now and keep an open mind. Don't reject anything. Don't be unnecessarily rebellious, and you'll get there. It's not a race. It's a journey. Okay, that's what I have for you. I hope that this resonated. If you would like a personal reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.